Good morning and welcome to Rome Part 3. We're going to talk about the Byzantine Empire today. And before we begin, I just wanted to go over the assignment instructions. So this week you have two assignments. One is a quiz and it's largely based off the reading and study materials. So make sure you have those under your belt before you take it. And the other assignment lends itself to the final paper. So in order to prepare, you'll need to visit week 8 and take a look at the assignment instructions. There are several options to choose from as you draft your final paper. So go through each one, choose the one that you feel most comfortable with, maybe the one you know best. Sometimes when I was a student, I would choose the one that I knew the least about just because I knew that was the thing that I would learn the most from. But that is completely up to you. And so once you get your topic under your belt, then you need to kind of begin drafting your outline. And so I provided a template in the assignment instructions. Make sure you read through that well. You'll want to download that. You can save over the top of it if you wish and use that to structure your argument. Now, this is technically a 3-part assignment. You'll find this is a little bit different. And some of you I've already spoken to about AI usage. And this assignment is designed to aid you in the use of AI, to use it as a tool rather than a crutch. And so when I say that, think about AI as something that you can use for the purpose of academic research. However, it should not be your only source. And you should never copy the prompt and use AI's answer as your paper because that's technically plagiarism. And AI isn't always correct either. And so you've got to really know your stuff. The key to using AI is to know what sort of questions to ask. Make sure you're leaning on your own knowledge as you use it. And if it's something you don't know much about, make sure you've researched it using the works of historians, journal articles, things like that, and fact check everything that it says. So that being said, I do think AI can be a good tool, but again, avoid using it as a crutch. And so that's what this assignment is designed to help you with. The idea here is that you create your own outline. So do not use any AI for your first draft. Make sure that everything you do, it should be very rudimentary. Everything should be your own thoughts, your own thesis, your own support, using the course content as much as possible. And you'll also do this again. I can't remember if it's next week or the week after. You'll create your reference page and you'll run that through AI as well. And you really, when you get to that point, you're going to be looking at the sources and if those sources actually align with your thesis statement. But we'll get to that next. So let's get through the outline this week. So what you're going to do is, create a rudimentary outline using only the course content, maybe a few other resources. If you found something that you just feel like is really supportive of your thesis statement, that's fine. And so take that outline. You can copy it. Well, you can do this one of two ways, right? And you don't necessarily have to use ChatGPT. You can use another generative AI program if you have one that you're more comfortable with. I think the assignments say Chat because that's the one that most people go to. But you can copy and paste that outline into your generative AI program, ask it some very specific questions. And I have a few questions in the instructions. You can certainly expand on that and ask it more or less if you wish. And so you're going to have to turn in, I said this is a 3-part assignment, right? You've got to turn in your rudimentary copy. Then you kind of polish it up using AI. But don't copy and paste anything into the outline. Make sure you type it all up, fact check what AI says. If you notice anything that is incorrect, make note of that. I have challenged AI a number of times when it's pulled up certain facts. I'll say, well, what about this particular thing? And it'll say, oh, good catch, or something like that. So you do need to know your stuff. And finally, the third part of this is I ask that you write a reflection. What did you learn from this assignment? How did you find that it helped you? Did you find maybe you found that it didn't really help you that much? But I'm looking for your feedback here as far as proper usage and improper usage of AI and using it as a tool versus a crutch. And so that's the main goal here, and also to help you draft a wonderful final paper. So if you have any questions about that, please reach out. I'm looking forward to reading your work and your feedback on this assignment. So this week, we are going to take a look at Rome heading into the Byzantine Empire. So I hope you took the time to look through part 2 of the ancient Roman Empire. Very fascinating stuff with the emperors and all sorts of debauchery and underboard activity going on, but also very essential in terms of political structure, right? There were some real turning points there where the Senate declined, and you sort of had this tyrannical government form. And so I hope you took note of some of those things. So today we're going to talk about Rome Part 3. I'm starting in AD 306 somewhere, and also to 337 you have Roman Emperor Constantine. And so he was born in the Balkans, and the Balkans are an essential region for a number of reasons. They've been called the powder keg of Europe. That's sort of where World War I sparked. You have this dry timber, and all of a sudden it just sort of inflames, and that happens in the Balkan region long before the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, right? You have the First Balkan War, Second Balkan War. You also have the Ottoman Empire, which is going to be essential to understand when we're talking about non-Western civilizations, right? And so I've got another PowerPoint. I will not be going through that as I'm doing this one, but it's in your reading and study materials about Islam, the birth of Islam, and you will need to be familiar with that as well. So in terms of Constantine, he was the son of Emperor Constantius Chlorus, who was one of the 4 rulers established by Diocletian. And so you have a tetrarch, which is, several rulers at one time, eventually faltered. Remember the triumvirate. And so you have notable historians like Judith Herron. She argued that Constantine was part of the problem. After his father died, he was acclaimed emperor by his troops. And so he was a soldier when he was young. In 312, he beat one of his greatest rivals, Maxentius, in the Battle of Milvian Bridge. And supposedly he had a spiritual conversion experience in which he saw a cross in the sky with the words inscribed, "In this sign you shall conquer." And after that, he had great respect for Christianity. Now, scholars differ on if he was actually a Christian or if he just respected it. But nevertheless, he is responsible for a number of creeds and things like that that really set the tone for how modern Christianity is interpreted. And so one of those is the Edict of Milan. It was established in 313, and that was a direct result of his unique experience. He ensured that all Christians would have freedom from persecution. And if you read Rome Part 2, or maybe know a little bit about Roman history, you know that the Christians were persecuted in the Colosseum for years and years. And so this was essential, quite a turning point. And this conversion was fairly a smooth transition because nearly half of the Roman Empire had converted to Christianity at that time. So it sort of made sense. You also had the Council of Nicaea in 325. This is where Constantine invited 300 bishops to discuss religious differences, and this resulted in the Nicene Creed. The Nicene Creed is akin to a statement of faith, and so if you're familiar with the church website, you might see they call this like the fundamentals of the faith, so to speak. We believe that there is one God, we believe in the Trinity, we believe in the Holy Spirit, those kind of things. That's sort of what the Nicene Creed does. And that is what set the standard for Christianity moving forward across most of Europe. Now, historiography is the way that historians write about history, and you have many perspectives. So I imagine if everyone listening to this lecture wrote their own book about Constantine, they would probably have different takes on it, just because that's sort of how we interpret history, according to our own personal lens as based on facts, right? And so Constantine's personal commitment to Christianity is disputed. His biographer, Eusebius, emphasizes it above all else. However, secular historians like Zosimus say that he was committed to the unconquered sun, which is Sol Invictus. Now, Eusebius was from Caesarea in Judea, which became a center for Christian learning in the 3rd century AD. He served under a man named Pamphilus, where he copied manuscripts like the Hebrew Bible. And so that's how he got most of his education, which was not uncommon for that time. He eventually was martyred for his faith, and after this, Eusebius changed his name to Eusebius Pamphili, which means that he was the adopted son of Pamphilus. So Constantine eventually asked the people in Caesarea for 50 copies of the Bible, and he wanted those to be used in churches in the new capital. And Eusebius's work is often criticized by scholars because he was a strong Christian. Some call him a brown noser of the crown. They say his work is fraudulent and distorted. He wrote some apologetic works specifically against Jewish interpretations. He argued that Christianity was neither Judaism nor Hellenism, and he thought that good scholarship was good apologetics. The historian Zosimus blames Constantine for all the ills of the Roman Empire. He states that Constantine abandoned his ancestral religion because a certain Egyptian assured him that the Christian religion was able to absolve him from guilt. So, fun facts there about the disagreements on Constantine, his faith, and the foundations of the Byzantine Empire. So, Constantine wanted to reunite the Roman Empire from Diocletian's split, and so he conquered the emperor of the East. He then moved to the ancient city of Byzantium, and this was a practical location because it sites at the entrance to the Black Sea between Europe and Asia. And so that made it a good location for sea trade. So you can kind of see on this map here a very neat split between East and West. You can see where Constantine's home is, where Byzantium is, and the Byzantine Empire becomes sort of a revived Roman Empire. And so by AD 330, it took Constantine about 6 years of intense construction to prepare Constantinople to be the new capital city. A line was plowed to mark out the walls, and this quadrupled the original territory. So this is obviously a cartoon, but it gives you an idea of what it probably looked like in its heyday. It's quite gorgeous, and the view also. The gates were constructed along the Golden Horn. The Golden Horn is a major inlet there, and it eventually becomes the fall of Constantinople, but they secured it very well for a very long time. So you can kind of see here an aerial shot of the Golden Horn. And so because there were so many Christians in Rome at this time, they set up their own court system. And this led Constantine to reform the courts because even the non-believers would visit Christian courts. Now, this is essential as you're writing about legacies. It is essential to write about the Byzantine court system as based on ancient Roman law, on the ancient Greeks and the other things that we have studied. Here you see a progression, right? And so the change had positive and negative impacts. On the negative side, it eventually allowed the Roman emperors to mandate certain beliefs and how to practice them. The Byzantine Empire was known for being orderly and strong. Justinian and Theodora were two of the essential leaders. That was around 530. So we're kind of fast forwarding a couple hundred years here. But Justinian created a very complex legal code called the Body of Civil Law. And a large shift from pagan worship occurred when Justinian modified law codes to create unified Christian empire. So all citizens were expected to be Catholic, but the Codex provided for specific regulations for the Jews. The Jews were not granted citizenship, nor were they allowed to intermarry with the Christians. They could not hold public office, nor could they testify in court against Christians. And so I think it's important to say here, and you'll see this in the presentation on Islam when you go through it, the Jews often found more solace with the Islamic folks than they did with the Christians. They felt a little bit more oppressed by the Christians at some points in history. And you know, this kind of waxed and waned over time, but it's interesting how much the Jews aligned with the Islamic empire, especially as it spread across North Africa. You know, some historians argue that they wouldn't have been able to have such success without the help of the Jews, who would literally open the gates of the city for them, offer them refuge, food, a place to spend the night, and then they could go on and do it. And it was very coordinated. So it's very interesting. So in terms of Byzantine law, it developed from the Roman legal system, which I said previously. This is recognized as one of Rome's great contributions to world civilization. Theodosius II established a state-funded law school in AD 425, and in 429 he ordered legal experts to compile a book for the Roman Empire, which transformed the laws of Constantine. And so that became known as the Codex Theodosianus. And the code contained more than 2,500 edited texts of laws that were issued between 313 and 437. He tried to remove any contradictory or confusing laws. And so, nearly a century after the publication of the Codex, Emperor Justinian came to power. It's 528, right? And he established a commission of 10 experienced lawyers to sort through all imperial constitutions. And this resulted in the creation of the Codex Constitutionum in 529. It was later simplified to the Corpus Juris Civilis, or Corpus of Civil Law. So the Code of Civil Law of 534 had 4 parts to it. Inclusion of revised constitutions. You have the Digest, which is summaries of the work of classical jurists. The Institutes was a textbook on Roman private law. Students were expected to master the law in 5 years before they could be admitted as professional lawyers. And there were new laws. So, you know, we think of like AD 534 as sort of a prehistoric time in a way. You know, it's called late antiquity. But really, it was very complex. Law in the Byzantine Empire was a very complex thing to study, and it was very difficult to become a lawyer. So you see a lot of the same trends as like in American society today, just knowing our Constitution, understanding how our laws work, being able to interpret a court case. These were things that you saw in 534 as well. And so the word Catholic means universal, and without the Catholic Church, Christians may have divided much sooner over doctrinal differences. They sort of had a hold on society. But in spite of this, you know, Rome fell in 476 under the reign of Romulus Augustus. Interesting. It started with a Romulus, ended with a Romulus. And so, and you make of that what you will. But Rome, remember I said earlier in one of the previous lectures, Rome was weakened from within, and then it couldn't withstand the pressure from without. And that's pretty much in a nutshell what happened. You have very few people were actually Roman citizens by the end of it. Taxes, slavery, unemployment, things like that played a role. You also had all of these tribes coming in, the Huns, the Goths, the Ostrogoths, Visigoths, people like that. And they just sort of took over. And it became sort of a free-for-all for a while, because Rome, in a way, was like the, quote, police of the world. And when they're gone, what do you do, right? And so that's where the Byzantine Empire was sort of a breath of fresh air after some of that. And so Rome went through many emperors over the next 100 years. At the height of its empire, Rome ruled almost all of Europe, parts of the Middle East, and the northern coast of Africa. They began to call the Mediterranean Sea Mare Nostrum, which is our sea. Rome's size was also part of its downfall. As Rome grew, it became more difficult to find enough soldiers to defend the territory. And so then they began hiring foreigners. Interestingly, you had the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes came into the area of Britain, and a lot of those soldiers left. They couldn't overpower them. They actually came into the Byzantine Empire and became trained mercenaries. The Varangian Guard also was one. So it was expensive, right, to hire soldiers like that. It drained the Roman economy. They raised taxes to pay for more soldiers, and they also devalued their currency, which is inflation. So the fall of Rome ushered in what became known as the Dark Ages and also called the Middle Ages. It was dark because of the moral decay and the lack of progress. People began to lose interest in the arts and education because they were simply trying to survive. And I think that's very telling. If you don't have enough food, if you're being invaded every other day, you're probably not producing a lot of great art, a lot of great works. It's literally just a day-to-day survival. And so the fall of Rome created a situation that caused the Catholic Church to gain more power. Rome was overtaken by the Germanic invaders known as the Vandals, and many of them actually did become Christians. As Rome lost political power, something was needed to uphold order, and so the church became a spiritual and political powerhouse. The Catholic community normally calls the disciple Peter their first pope. However, Gregory was one of the first after the fall of Rome. Gregory was born into a wealthy family. He became mayor of Rome when he was 33. He had a kind spirit and he was very concerned about the poor. He turned his home into a monastery and provided for the people. And so that brings us to the creation of Islam, which was around AD 622 with Muhammad. And as Islam spread, Christian ties became stronger in efforts to fight against it. So that leads into the Crusades and things like that. So I encourage you to go on and take a look at the PowerPoint on Islam, read through this week's reading and study materials, and you should be pretty well versed on what happens next. So I hope you enjoyed this lecture. It's a very fascinating topic. Reach out if you guys have questions about the assignment, specifically the outline. I'm always here to answer anything that you might have. And I will look forward to speaking with you guys next week.